thank Kayla for the communion. What a great communion. You know, as someone who gets up and speaks a lot, it's actually, what she did was extremely challenging to do. She included a lot of insight and a lot of information and a lot of Bible in a very short amount of time. She referenced 4 different narratives very clearly, tied it all together very well. It was very deep, very meaningful. It was a great, we could actually end church right now and we would all be edified. So it was a very, very, very good communion. So thank you very much, Kayla. I appreciate that. Of course, this year we are talking about the concept of home, the idea that we are making a home right here with one another. We are trying to make a home for those seeking refuge out in the world, and the idea that God one day will be coming back. He will make a home here with us, and the dividing line that is between us and him will be torn, and God will make heaven and earth will be married, and he'll be here with us. And while we're waiting for that, we're preparing. And so we're doing all of that. That's our theme for this year. For this summertime, for last month and for this month, we are talking about the concept of wisdom under the banner of home. Because to make a good home, you have to be wise. And so that's what we've been talking about for this last month. You know, our certainties about life are often our undoing. The things that we are most certain about are oftentimes the things that are the biggest trip-ups for us in life. And our unhealthy certainty is most often betrayed by the glaring lack of curiosity and questioning that we have in life. We, as Christians, as followers of God and Jesus, we should be in a state of unknowingness, okay? We, of all people, should be most in touch that we don't know. That we are not in control, that we are powerless, that God is in control, and we don't know the mind of God. We have insights into the mind of God. Every once in a while, he reveals himself to us. We have the Word of God, but we do not know him, and everything is within his hands. So we should be living in a state of curiosity as it pertains to life. You know, Bertrand Russell once said, this is one of my favorite quotes by him, but the whole problem with the world is that fools and fanatics are always so certain of themselves, but the wisest people are so full of doubts. If you are wise, you are full of questions. You approach every situation with questions. This is what we're going to talk about today. So much of life begins with a simple question or request. Are you hiring right now? Mom and Dad, can I go out for the football team? Do you want to go to prom with me? Yes. Will you study the Bible with me? Can I have a raise? I heard you, babe. No, I heard it. My wife believes that if I don't laugh at her jokes, it's either that I didn't hear them or that I didn't understand them. Other questions in life. What do you think I most need to change my life? Will you marry me? There are so many important questions and requests in life. The world turns upon questions. You know, Megan's dad, my whole family that's living here right now, so Megan, Gus, Jasper, and Cora, today they're getting on a plane and they're flying to Ohio to spend a few days with Megan's dad and stepmom. And Megan's dad is one of my best friends. I love Megan's dad. He's one of my closest friends. I look up to him. I admire Megan's dad. I wish that we lived close to one another. I miss him very much, but I love Megan's dad. But Megan's dad, first and foremost, what you have to know is he's an Indiana man, okay? He is straightforward. He knows how to work hard, and he believes that working hard is a virtue. He means what he says, and he says what he means. He is fiercely protective of the people that he loves. He is amiable. He's a good old boy. Like, if you met him, you would like him immediately. He's one of these people where if he was walking down the street and there was a statue there, if he started talking to the statue, it wouldn't surprise me if the statue started talking back to him. Okay? Here's the thing, though. He could tear you apart if he wanted to. He was a Marine, an FBI agent. He worked for the Defense Department, and in his retirement, he did counterintelligence in Afghanistan. Okay? He's fiercely intelligent. He's tougher than me, he's smarter than me, and like his daughter, everybody likes him more than me. The only piece of leverage I have over John Edmiston is that his daughter fell in love with me. That's the only leverage I have against him. Which led me one day to the question that I had to ask him. I want to marry your daughter. Can I? And I remember asking him, hey, can I, and our relationship wasn't quite developed at this point, but, my relationship with Megan's family began rocky. Like, I wasn't the guy they wanted. And so everyone wasn't sure about me. Megan is the golden child of her family. She played college basketball, straight A student, went to an Ivy League women's college, everybody likes her, and then you have me who's barely going to college, has no direction in life, is a misanthrope in just about every category of life. I would go to church with her sometimes, and they'd all be like saying the prayers and the songs, and I would just be sitting there disgruntled. Like, I'm not saying this just because they tell me to say this. And so Megan's family didn't love me, coming around. And so the day that I had to ask her dad if I could marry her, I didn't know what he was going to say. I knew that I needed to ask, and I hoped that he would give me his blessing. I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do if he said no. That moment, so we're sitting there in Megan's grandma's house. Him and I are eating, and I asked him, I said, hey, I want to marry Megan. I love her. Could I have your blessing? I'll tell you right now that nations rose and fell in the silence between my question and his answer. Entire star systems winked out of existence at that time. My heart stopped, and I'm sure subsequently killed millions of brain cells in my head. My life was forever changed in that question that I first asked him, and then a few days later asked her. The world we live in turns upon the questions we ask and those that we don't ask. The people that are most competent, most effective, most successful, and most content walk into situations asking good questions. Foolish people don't ask questions. They assume that they already know the answers. This is what we're discussing today. Having children is really disruptive. You just can't do anything you want to do. All right, I have 5 kids, age 21 down to 8 years old. So there's a pretty big range of conversations that I have with my children every single day. From helping them fill out FAFSA documents for college to mediating very sensitive negotiations about who gets to ride shotgun in the Jeep, Their lives overlap and intrude with my own plans 99% of the time. They are the greatest blessing outside of my faith and my wife. But they bring to bear upon a day's activities a lot of diversion. And it's very tempting to take shortcuts on conversations and issues that concern them, especially if they don't concern me. When they do something that lands them in trouble, or where there is a disagreement among them that I don't always feel like launching into a full investigation about, I just want it to be over. I just want them to listen to what I say. That's usually the problem in the first place. If you just did what I told you to do, if you just obeyed me, we wouldn't be having this conversation right now. Now, this is because I think I already know what they should do. And it's exhausting to try and explain to them that, again, this is when in frustration or embarrassment, if they've done something to humiliate me as a parent, I descend into lecture mode, You can always tell that I've gotten into lecture mode because my kids' eyes start to gloss over a little bit. And they give me what I call the dead eye stare. Like, they're there, they're alive, they're conscious, but their brain's not working right now. Like, they're not there. They're in another universe. So they're alive, but they're not conscious right there. And they're just staring at me, and they're not reacting to what I'm saying. Like, there's no facial expressions. There's no like shame. There's no guilt. There's just a dead stare, and that gets me really angry. So I escalate things somehow, thinking that will be the appropriate way to get the response that I deserve. If I escalate it, if I scare them, if I get them nervous, then they'll give me the responses that I'm looking for. Now, perhaps you've been there before as a parent. Oddly enough, this tactic rarely seems to work the way that I want it to. I found that asking questions work a lot better. There's an author named Paul David Tripp, and he actually is he ministers to a lot of ministers, but he teaches a lot of classes about parenting. And he has this, I've never forgotten this. I've heard him speak in a video once. And he said, this is when I have to get into a conflict with my kids, or I have to ask about something they did, or we have to have a serious conversation, I ask the same 5 questions every single time. And these are the 5 questions. Number 1, what happened? Tell me from your mouth and your version what happened. Secondly, what were you thinking while this was happening? So while you just described to me what happened, when all that was going on, what was going through your head? Now, based on what you were thinking, what did you do in response? All right, so what happened? What were you thinking? And then based upon your thinking, what is it that you did? Why did you do it? What were you hoping was going to happen by doing what you did? And then, lastly, so what was the result of all of this? All right? The goal of these questions is manifold. Firstly, it helps a child connect the results of what they did, the last question, to what they were thinking and feeling, the first or second question. All right, so it's a good way. You do it over and over and over again. The idea is, and it takes a long time, it doesn't take 1 year or 2 years or 3 years, it takes years of doing this. But over time, the idea is that a child will begin to connect the end results from what they felt about what was happening, or what they thought. And they start to see that the results and what you feel and what you think are intimately connected, not the circumstances, okay? But in the immediacy, so that takes a long time for a child to learn, but in the immediacy, it demonstrates that parents themselves have not yet drawn conclusions about the child before they've asked them some questions that draw out their motivation, their thinking, and their feeling. This in turn helps a child desire to talk about what happened instead of dreading talking about what happened. Because they trust that there will be time and that there is a desire to be understood by the person who most determines what's going to happen to them, their parent. Does that make sense, guys?
Yes.
Children love when their parents are legitimately curious. I would submit to you the same is true of God. Proverbs 3 verse 5 says this, trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not rely on your own understanding. This is a well-known Bible verse. As a matter of fact, this Bible verse is oftentimes repackaged in different ways throughout the narrative of Scripture, okay? Unfortunately, verses like this also become kind of a catch-all platitude when people don't know what to say. Something that people say when they don't know what to say. Let me tell you what this verse means to me. Let me tell you what this verse, if I were to rewrite this verse as to how I hear it, this is what this verse says to me. Okay, again, the actual verse says, trust in the Lord with all your heart, do not rely on your own understanding. This is what it means to me. Trust in the Lord, whose mind you don't always know, and whose plans you don't always know, rather in the things that you think you know. And the reality is that by living under this philosophy means that we would always be living with a lot of questions. Living not with certainty, but with curiosity. Does that make sense, guys?
Yes.
Aren't you more comfortable when people are curious about you rather than certain about you?
Yes.
Isn't that how we want to be treated? You know, I believe that the reasons for discontent, the reasons for unrealized hopes, the reason for broken relationships, for bitterness, for misunderstanding, and for most issues that ail the human condition in our part of the world has much to do with curiosity, or more acutely, the lack of it. Too often the right questions simply aren't being asked in a situation. I believe that who we are and what we become in life has so much to do with the questions that we ask and those that we neglect to ask. The questions that we ask other people. And especially the questions that we ask ourselves. Now, as this is a topic that we could literally spend months talking about, we have to narrow the focus. To begin, I think that we would all be better human beings if we were more persuaded that we just don't know very much. We would all act like better people if we were persuaded that we did not know. That we did not know why that person did that thing. That we did not know why this world event happened. That we did not know why this policy was made. If we were all a lot more curious and a lot less certain, I think we would be much more content. There are a few questions I've asked people thousands of times in my life. And every week, for the last 25, 30 years, being a Christian, mostly being a minister, I get with a lot of people. Some of them desperately want to talk about things that are going on in their lives. Some of them desperately need to talk about things that are going on in their lives, but they don't want to talk about them. And more specifically, they don't want to talk about them with me. All right, so I'm in that position quite a bit. And so there's questions that I have asked thousands of times to people. All right, and some of them follow that same line of thinking that Paul David Tripp said to ask kids. And the first one is, what are you or what were you thinking? The second one is, what are you right now or what were you feeling? And the last one is, what are you going to do? All right, those three questions, it's pretty simple. What are you thinking or what were you thinking? What are you feeling? What were you feeling? And what are you going to do? Hours have been filled in one conversation with one person without ever getting to the last question. Just asking the question, what are you thinking, puts people into a tornado of not knowing. If you ask me, how do you feel? That's going to take me a few hours to answer. I don't know. I don't think about that sort of thing. I don't know what I'm feeling. 20 years from now, I'll know what I'm feeling right now. That's how long I need. All right? And I have discovered something profound in asking these three questions. People don't know. They don't know what they're thinking. They don't know what they're feeling. They're not sure what they're going to do. All right? More often than not, when I ask these questions, the answers change in the middle of the conversation. So what were you thinking? Well, I'm thinking this. But by the end of the conversation, they've just changed what they're thinking. Or if I ask, what were you thinking? Oh, this is what I was thinking. But then by the end of the conversation, they've changed. All right, our memories change. Our feelings right now change. We retroactively apply stuff. We have a lot of trouble just answering the question, what are we thinking? All right, I'm guessing that if I were to ask you, if I were to take one event in your life that stands out, and I were to ask you at 50 different points in your life what you were feeling about that event, I'm guessing I would get a lot of different answers. The event hasn't changed. I'm asking the same person about the same event at different ages in their life, and they're going to give me a different answer. That's how complicated we are. That's how much we don't know. At the beginning of a conversation, you might be feeling X, Y, or Z about a thing, and by the end, you might be feeling something completely different. But that's normal. That doesn't mean we're incompetent. That doesn't mean we're dumb. That doesn't mean we're not in touch. That means we're normal. It's normal to not completely understand exactly what we're thinking and feeling. And yet, I'm amazed at how certain we can be of our knowledge of why other people do things. What other people are feeling and what other people are thinking. You can't tell me what you're thinking. You can definitely tell me what I'm thinking. It's folly. That is folly. When the Bible talks about foolishness, that's it right there. The hypocrisy of it is stunning. It is folly. We have to begin by asking God questions. If we're going to become wise, we need to ask God questions. In Joshua chapter 9, there's a very short narrative, and it's in the Bible because what takes place here has generational impact. And it's a very simple story. Joshua and the Israelites have been walking into the promised land. They've been conquering the Canaanites. They've been doing exactly what God asked them to do. They've been being brave. They've been, in Joshua, in Deuteronomy and Joshua, the term strong and courageous is uttered over and over and over and over again. Trust me. Do what I say. Be strong and courageous. And you know what? The Israelites were doing it. They were conquering people they had no business conquering. They were slaves. They didn't have weapons of war, and they were winning. They're blowing horns and dancing around walls, and they're falling down. It's amazing, okay? All right? We get to this part in Joshua chapter 9. It's this cautionary tale that has generational impact. In verse 14, it says this, then the men of Israel, okay, so what happened? I didn't want to read the whole thing. I'm going to give you a little context. These people, the Gibeonites, they see Israel coming. They're like, these guys are unstoppable. They're tearing apart everybody in their path. We don't worship their God. We don't plan on worshiping their God. If we don't do something, we're going to be next. And so they say, let's pretend that we live far away from them and that we're coming to make a treaty with them. All right? And we'll make a treaty with them. And once we make a treaty of them, because of the way that their God operates, they can't go back on their promises. So if they make a treaty with us, they won't be able to break it because their God operates that way. Whereas we're going to pretend that we live far away. We're going to come and we're going to have dusty clothing. It's going to look like we've spent all of our provisions. Really, we live only a couple miles away. They don't know that. But we're going to trick them. All right. So that's what happens. Verse 14 says, then the men of Israel took some of their provisions, the Gibeonites, but did not seek the Lord's decision. So Joshua established peace with them and made a treaty to let them live. And the leaders of the community swore an oath to them. 3 days after making the treaty with them, they heard that the Gibeonites were their neighbors, living among them. So the Israelites set out and reached the Gibeonite cities on the third day. Now their cities were Gibeon, Sephirah, Beerah, Kiriath-Jearim. But the Israelites did not attack them because the leaders of the community had sworn an oath to them by the Lord, the God of Israel. Then the whole community grumbled against the leaders. See, the Israelites had gotten to a place where they thought they knew better. They had won so many battles, they'd had so many victories, they didn't think they needed to ask anymore. They had been on this roll of victories, and they began relying upon their own judgment more and more without really consulting God. They did not truly believe that God was needed in this decision, and it would haunt them for generations to come as a result. We have to ask God questions. We have to inquire after His wisdom. We may not like the answers that we're going to get. I'm positive that's why we don't ask. It's been a long time since I prayed to God at the beginning of the year, hey, God, I really want to learn humility this year. Because God answers those things. He's going to teach you one way or another. And when you ask questions, God will answer them. We have to inquire after His will and wisdom. But He doesn't always answer quickly. He doesn't always give the answers that we're looking for. And He doesn't always have a delivery system that's predictable. But this is where we ought to start before we make up our minds about anything. Secondly, we have to ask each other questions. We have to ask each other way more questions. Joshua chapter 22, this is another story that's coming into the promised land. Bear with me, guys, all right? Israelites they've done most of the conquering, all right? They've established some cities. A couple of the tribes of Israel, when they were walking into the promised land, they saw that some of the land was really good on the east side of the Jordan. So they asked Joshua, they say, hey, can we just have this land? I mean, this is good. We don't need to go any further. This is good. And Joshua said, yes, but you still have to come and help us fight. We helped you fight for your land. You still have to come help us fight. And so those eastern tribes are like, oh, of course. So they come, they help the other tribes fight for their land. All the fighting is pretty much done now. The eastern tribes have returned to their side of the river, okay? Now, they return to their side of the river and they go, you know what though? Here's the thing. People are forgetful, and what we're going to do is we're going to build an altar right here so that the people on the other side of the river don't forget that we're still their brothers. So that the next generation of people keep in mind that we're still related to them and that we all share in the covenant blessings of God. All right? Now that might seem silly, but they don't live in an age of mass communication. Everything can be forgotten in a single generation. So they set up this altar because they're assuming they're going to be forgotten. All right? And so the Israelites on the other side, they see them building an altar all of a sudden. This is their reaction. Joshua 22, verse 11. Then the Israelites heard it said, look, the Reubenites, Gadites, and the half-tribes of Manasseh have built an altar on the frontier of the land of Canaan at the region of the Jordan on the Israelite side. When the Israelites heard this, the entire Israelite community assembled at Shiloh to go to war against them. So they build an altar. Hey, we want to stay connected. All right? They don't talk to anybody. They just build the altar. The other side, they see the altar. You know what they see? They're already worshiping the false gods. We just got here. Our parents were punished for 40 years in the wilderness for not trusting God. They get to the other side of the river, they immediately build an altar because there's only one place they can make sacrifices to the Lord. All right? That's at the tabernacle in Shiloh. They built an altar on the other side of the river. They thought that they were going to start sacrificing at that altar. So Israel's like, that's it, we're going to war. All right? No conversations are happened yet. Everybody's making assumptions about one another. So they get the whole army, and they're just about to attack, and they say, hey, this is why we're attacking. You're about to worship false gods. We're not having that. We're not going to have God punish us anymore because of you idiots. And they're like, whoa, 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 whoa. We did this because we knew that you guys were going to forget about us. You forgetful jerk faces. Look, you're already coming to war against us. This is why we built the altar, so you would remember that we're with you. You shouldn't be fighting us. The whole thing happens because nobody is asking anybody any questions. One side assumed they'd be forgotten and so made an altar so the other side would remember their agreement of solidarity with one another. The other side assumed that the altar was made in defiance to God and his covenant. Both sides acted and made decisions about the other side without ever first asking a single question. Now think about your last argument for a second. Think about your last big blow-up or conflict. Did you ask any questions, or did you simply just dive in with a set of assumptions that only served to escalate the conflict? I can almost guarantee that your last argument was made much worse by a conspicuous lack of curiosity. You know, I hate it when people don't like me. I do. I've learned not to obsess about it, but it bothers me. It may not seem like it would bother me, but it does. If someone doesn't like me, I'm just like, why? What's not to like? And I've learned not to be passive-aggressive in return. All right? I've also learned not to just be aggressive in return. I know that it's pointless to try and change someone's mind through flattery or other types of manipulations, but it bothers me. It bothers me when people don't like me. Mostly it's ego, I'm sure. But when someone isn't a believer, I can shake that off. I go, they don't like me, who knows why? They don't believe in God. You know, they don't believe in forgiveness, they may not believe in grace, who knows why? You know, it's a fallen world, they're probably messed up. When believers don't like me, I can't shake it off as easy. You know, sometimes maybe I said something from the pulpit that they didn't like. You know? I mean, that happens a lot. I say a lot of stuff. I got a big mouth. Stuff just comes out. You guys know, I try and write out most of my stuff so nothing comes out that's bad, but sometimes it just does. And then it becomes a myriad of little things that I do after I've said something that they don't like that only proves to them why they shouldn't like me. I've done the same thing to others. I have. Somebody says something that hits me the wrong way, and I'm like, oh, okay, now I know who you are. Now I know who you are. And then as I watch them go about, do their stuff, I just see little things that prove my initial assumption. You've probably had the same thing done to you. And more often than not, the most painful part of it, if it's been done to you, is that people just haven't asked you a single question. Just assumptions, which puts a person on the defensive. When people make assumptions about you, you're on the defensive, which is hard for Christians, because we know that we're not supposed to be defensive. As a disciple of Jesus, we understand that being a defensive person is not conducive to being a humble person. And I think that's the right attitude to have. We shouldn't be defensive. So most good-hearted believers try their best not to be defensive, but to listen and really try to accept what someone else is saying is coming from a good place. Swallowing your pride is hard. I know, I do it every day. So it's especially damaging, therefore, to have Christians make assumptions about other Christians and put them into a situation where they've not asked questions but only make assumptions. You are really taking unfair advantage of our culture, of a believer's genuine effort not to be defensive when you make lazy assumptions without asking any questions. We've built a culture of don't be defensive. Listen to people. And so you really take advantage of that culture when you don't ask questions. All right? You destroy, you make that culture awful and caustic if you don't take the time to ask questions. We have to ask each other questions. And finally, we'll conclude with this, but we do damage when we ask questions, but we don't really want to know the answer. You know, 2 Kings 12, 6 through 8, it's the story of how the kingdom divided. All right? In most of the Bible, you'll hear about Ephraim or Israel, the northern kingdom, and the southern kingdom in Judah. All right? The two different kingdoms. All right? They used to be united. Under David, they were united. Under Saul, they were united. Under Solomon, they were united. Solomon's son, Rehoboam, comes into power. People come to Rehoboam and say, hey, listen, your dad, there was a lot of forced labor under your dad building that temple and his palace. Okay? He worked us hard. You better not do the same thing. You need to take it easy on us. So Rehoboam tells the people, hey, let me get some advice about that. So he goes, and in verse 6 it says this, then King Rehoboam consulted the elders who had served his father Solomon when he was alive, asking, how do you advise me to respond to these people? They replied, today if you will be a servant to this people and serve them, and if you respond to them by speaking kind words to them, they will be your servants forever. All right, so Rehoboam asked, hey, what do you think I should do? Here's the thing, Rehoboam didn't want to really know.
No.
All right, the next verse, but he rejected the advice of the elders who had advised him and consulted with the young men who had grown up with him and attended him. Rehoboam didn't care about the answer.
Right.
He didn't care about wisdom. He's searching for the answer he wants. The young men tell him, don't listen to those old guys. You be strong here. People are going to take advantage of you if you're not strong. You tell the people, as strong as my father was, I'm going to be twice as strong. He may have whipped you with whips. I'm going to whip you with scorpions. All right? He got like dramatic and poetic in his response. And the people left him. 10 tribes gone, just like that. Divided the kingdom. Rehoboam didn't care what would be best for the situation. He was asking questions to find answers that would validate what he was already planning on doing.
Exactly. Yeah.
Now, I've experienced this many times in my life. When someone's asked me a question, not to discover what they don't know, but to prove what they already think they know. They use questions as a way to trap. They use questions as a way to trip you. As though I were on trial and they were a prosecutor. It isn't curiosity at that point. It's a contest to see who wins or loses. Curiosity cannot be a tactic. Asking questions is not simply a demonstration of civility or a ritual people do before they make decisions that they were already planning to make. Questions ought to be a genuine acknowledgement that you do not assume that you already know everything. You know, in 1986, there was a nuclear meltdown in a city called Chernobyl. Most of us know about this. Most of us were alive during this. It was an incredible disaster, but it's one that unfolded slowly over months because we were only getting part of the story for a very, very long time. Now, when I lived in Chicago, I visited Kiev, Ukraine many, many times. That was our mission field, and so I went to Ukraine, fairly often. And we supported a lot of the churches in Ukraine. And one of the most constant factors about Kiev is the history of Chernobyl, which was only 60 miles away from Kiev. Many disciples died young in Kiev because of cancer that doctors believed came from Chernobyl. Millions of people in the area suffered from the fallout of that disaster. But one of the stunning failures of that disaster is that people running the plant did not want to know the truth. As the meltdown was happening, and And as the scope of the disaster was spreading, you had people in multiple levels of oversight that simply denied the reality of the situation. Without going into great detail, the pain of acknowledging the truth, or more importantly, discovering the truth, or asking the questions to find out what was actually happening, was too painful for them to consider. So they decided that it was better to live in ignorance. From facility managers all the way to the highest leaderships within the Kremlin, no one wanted to know the truth. And because of that, they didn't ask any questions, and the result has been devastating. In 2018, 30 years after the meltdown, nearly 1 million people were collecting benefits in the Ukraine alone because of disabilities that they are attributed to Chernobyl. Millions of acres of land will be considered uninhabitable for hundreds of years. No one really knows how many deaths were caused because the cover-up continues to this day. All because people just didn't really want to know. So they didn't ask the right questions. In their insane pursuit of curating reality to what made them feel secure and comfortable, people rested in the certainty of their delusions, and as a result perpetrated arguably the worst man-made disaster in the history of the planet. Much of it could have been avoided simply by asking a few questions. If we are wise, we care more about living life according to what is true than what is comfortable. Yet none of us will gain wisdom or truth with the simple fact of existing. Wisdom doesn't necessarily come because of age or because you're alive for a long time, nor through experience always. We have to be willing to do as Jesus instructs his own students. Matthew 7:7. Keep asking, and it will be given to you. Keep searching, and you will find. Keep knocking, and the door will be open to you. Amen. Thank you very much.